Hey everybody, I'm Eli Gerber from the policy team here at Indivisible. Thanks so much for tuning into the second episode of our new series, COVID Corruption, the only web series where I have to say this to avoid getting yelled at in the comments. My roommate cut my hair. I did not go to a barber and violate social distancing. I promise. We hope you enjoyed episode 1 about how Big Pharma is trying to cash in on the coronavirus outbreak. Today, we'll take a look at how our democracy is under attack by Republican politicians and their chosen judges, especially during the pandemic. So let's dive in. On April 7th, despite desperate warnings from public health officials and the state's Democratic Governor Tony Evers, Wisconsin held its primary elections. In an attempt to protect themselves from coronavirus while still exercising their rights, hundreds of thousands of Wisconsinites requested absentee mail-in ballots to prevent the need for in-person voting. But Republicans did everything they could to suppress those mail-in votes and denied there was even a risk to public health in the first place. Just look at Wisconsin Speaker Robin Vos on Election Day.
You are incredibly safe to go out.
Yeah, I'm just gonna take the guy wearing more protective equipment than your average astronaut at his word about the lack of risk involved that day. Vos was one of the key actors who tried to create confusion and uncertainty leading up to the election to depress turnout. So how did all this go down? First, Wisconsin's gerrymandered state legislature, which disproportionately favors Republicans from low-population rural areas, prevented a move to postpone the election or send mail-in ballots to all voters. Then, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, which is controlled by Republican judges, declined to postpone the election. And finally, the 5 conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that thousands of mail-in ballots were ineligible to be counted, forcing Wisconsinites to decide between their health or their vote. Now, why would the courts disenfranchise thousands of voters and put lives in danger? The answer is simple: for political gain. The 5 conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court aren't just conservatives, they're Republicans. Brett Kavanaugh got his start in the George W. Bush administration, in fact. The Wisconsin Supreme Court is similarly controlled by Republican judges who were handpicked by Wisconsin's former terrible governor, Scott Walker. There's a reason these people were picked to be judges and justices, and it's because they are true believers in GOP orthodoxy. And guess what? Those Republicans in robes issued these awful anti-democratic decisions in the hopes that coronavirus fears would depress turnout and deliver a victory for an important Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. While Republicans ultimately failed to capture the seat, the damage was already done. Hundreds of thousands of people waited in hours-long lines while trying to vote and put everyone in danger of catching the virus. Republicans across the political sphere, from state legislatures to the U.S. Supreme Court, are trying to rig democracy for their benefit. And because keeping their own power is more important to them than protecting our democracy and public health, dozens of people have been diagnosed with coronavirus directly related to that April primary. And it's all part of a longer-term project by Republicans to undermine long-standing voter protections that were hard-won as part of the civil rights movement back in the 1960s. Whether it's state-level Republicans enacting strict voter ID laws and closing down polling places in black communities, Mitch McConnell blocking funding for election security and mail-in voting, Donald Trump spreading lies about voter fraud even as he twists our democratic institutions beyond recognition so that he personally can profit, or the Supreme Court issuing decisions that gut the Voting Rights Act, the Republican Party is committed from bottom to top to making sure that it is as hard as possible to vote. The Wisconsinites who risked their health during a pandemic to stand in hours-long lines in thunderstorms to cast their vote should be celebrated for their commitment to upholding our democracy. But they never should have been put in those risky conditions in the first place. I mean, just look at this video from an Indivisible Wisco member waiting in line at their polling place in Milwaukee County on primary day. We can't risk anything like this happening in November. The federal government must step in to increase funding for safe, secure elections by expanding mail-in voting and providing expanded in-person voting options. And that's it for our second episode of COVID Corruption. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow along as we continue to hold Republicans and their corporate friends accountable during this crisis. Thanks everyone, we'll see you next time.